All right, ladies and gentlemen, all I have to do is find the chat window so that I will be able to follow what you are all saying. I'm sorry, I just threw out a tweet. The subject of the discussion tonight will be virtue, chivalry as a memory tradition. And in the course of it, I will be looking at etymology, at material culture, at some of the foundational elements of Indo-European culture. I'll be fooling around with the artes memorative, the arts of memory. All of these things, marks, signs, mark studies, all these sorts of things will be intertwined in my discussion this evening. I just wanted to give everyone an introduction. I am now going to check over here on the chat window and we'll allow some time for people to join the discussion. And where is that window I'm looking for? There we go. And I have a couple of announcements to make before we get started. I have to mix myself a drink, which will give people time to come in and I can check out the chat. And I am now doing that. Please bear with me. Set it for live chat so I can see everything. Now I just need to pop the window out. Voila. And now I should be able to track whatever the hell is going on. Moonman, Jesse J, welcome. We've got an H Grimes in the house. Okay, I'm going to make a quick announcement, then I'm going to make a drink, and then once the drink is done, that will be joining time for everyone, and then I will get started. So announcements first, I just did some recordings with Mr. Tim today. We had two topics of discussion. The first clip we did that ran about an hour is on the great game and the pieces on the board. In a number of respects, we've covered, all of this before that we talk about in this latest clip, but I kind of approached it from a slightly different angle. I kind of rephrased the question, trying to understand the layout of the game board, the pieces on it, the players, this sort of thing. That will be going up in the next 24 to 48 hours. And then there is a clip I did with him, and it is on the subject of white guilt. And in that clip, I attempted to get to the bottom of this puzzling and I should say phenomenon, or rather affliction, this puzzling affliction that we're all suffering from. The only thing is the nature of Tim's responses in the course of that discussion required it to be a bit shoot only. So two clips are coming up, one about the great game and movements, players, moves on the game board, how it's all set up, what's happening. That will be coming in the next 24 to 48 hours. And then following that on BitChute only, so I enjoin you to follow both a Safer Space and Semiagog over on BitChute as well. You will be seeing the clip on white guilt. So there it is. I'll get started on a virtue, chivalry as a memory tradition. In just a moment, while people are coming in, I will mix myself a drink and say hello. Pure White Man, hello. The Beast, El Vaquero 555 is in the house. Welcome, sir. John Ski, hello, sir. And Mr. Ixme. Now, how do I work this chat window? I think what I need to do is make Mr. Ixme a moderator. Mr. Ixme, you are now a moderator for the channel. Please do not abuse this sacred trust that has been bestowed upon you. Mind you, if you need to go away and not follow this stream anymore, there is no, evil responsibility placed on your shoulders. But if someone comes through and they're really an asshole, feel free to put them in timeout or whatever the other functions are that you have now been granted as a moderator. So what else? We have Jesse J, the Beast, Disciple of Bugs. Yes, welcome all. So I'm going to mix a drink, and then I'm going to get started on this discussion. I hope you are all having a wonderful Friday evening. I myself am not doing poorly, which is a happy circumstance. Who else here is in the chat? H. Grimes feels unloved. That's funny. Nick McNickface in here live. Excellent. Now here's where I'm going to try not to spill whiskey all over my desk. Oh, look, he's a big boy, ladies and gentlemen. He can do it. We don't want to spill it because that would be alcohol abuse. Ah, yes. For those of you who are coming in, I'm just mixing up a drink to have a little cocktail while I present Virtue, Chivalry as a Memory Tradition, coming up soon, mere moments away. Oh, I managed it. The beast, face, yes. These people are in the house. In the house, please press the like button. God. Sorry, people, I need to focus on pouring the sugar here. Again, ladies and gentlemen, please bear with this pause. We're waiting for the live stream to get started. When this thing is finally finished, any of those of you who show up and are bored by all of this, you can jump ahead to where the conversation starts in earnest. But the constraints of a live broadcast being what they are, you'll just have to suffer through it. It will take only a moment more. Now for the grand finale of this operation I've undertaken. Hopefully we won't have a burning Michael Jackson moment here where I set myself on fire. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, do not try this at home. Yeah, there we go. That'll work. Shit. Sorry, pyrotechnic failure, ladies and gentlemen. Again, the subject of the discussion will be Virtue, Chivalry as a Memory Tradition, in which I will use things like etymology, material culture, techniques drawn from the art of memory, and all sorts of other things, and illustrated beautifully by a talented oil painter to discuss the possible origins of Indo-European culture and its features and what we can learn from it today. All right. Thank you for bearing with me. Nice whiskey, yes. Whiskey is always a good call. What are you doing? You should wear a helmet. Yes, indeed. Welcome, Tire Queen. All right. So I have a topic that I'm going to share with all of you. Now, I just need to share my screen in order to who wants to see him spontaneously combust? Just a boiling, smoking, bubbling pile of human fat burning through the floor like you get with spontaneous human combustion. Nice. Okay, I need a blank screen so I can show you what I'm going to be going through, and we will get started. I made myself a old-fashioned in a rather roundabout way. Cheers, everyone. Happy Friday evening. Oh. All right. So let's get started. Thank you again for your patience. This will be a discussion of Virtue, Chivalry as a Memory Tradition. Now I just need to set this to share screens. Where is the little share screen button? I feel certain it wasn't this difficult for me before. Gats. My retard. Don't answer that question. Good God, where did it go? There used to be a little thing. Damn it. I'm embarrassing myself in front of all 5 people in this chat. All right, someone tell me where the hell the share screen thing is in Google Hangouts. For fuck's sake. Shame on me. Screen share. Okay, there we go. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you should now be seeing the screen. And in just a moment, in theory, you will be able to see this, which is a group of note, a group of signs. Okay, hopefully this will be visible. All right. So how do I explain what the hell all of this is about? Well, imagine, if you will, that a given culture produces certain objects, and these objects in and of themselves tell you of themselves. So if you take a look at a boot, most of us can figure out that it's designed to go on a foot. If you take a look at the handle of something like a sword, you can tell that it is meant to be gripped. And so by gripping that sword or wearing that footwear, you can experience to some extent how it was intended to be used. Right? Slashing cuts come naturally if you're holding a saber. If that saber has a full guard that wraps all the way around the hand, or an extended pommel that comes out at a right angle, then it's probably designed to stay in the hand even when making big sweeping gestures from horseback, when you can have the sudden shock of your sword smacking into whatever you're chopping at or slicing at. And there's a reason for that perpendicular projection on the pommel of a sword. If you've got a set of stirrups and it's a bar stirrup, then it's very likely designed so that the heel of a boot fits over it. If, for example, you have a stirrup that's rather different from the bar stirrups we're used to, and it has a circular platform, then it can be designed for the ball of the foot to rest upon it. And all of this sounds like, why the hell is he talking about swinging swords, or how a stirrup works, or how a boot heel hooks over a stirrup? Well, because there are behaviors that go with those things. If I have a boot heel that goes over a bar stirrup, then I probably slung my stirrups down closer to having straight legs off the saddle. Of course, not perfectly straight, but that's one riding style, and it keeps you seated in your horse. If you're in heavy armor, you're going to want a saddle that has a high pommel and cantle that locks your body in. And from looking at the objects, the physical objects, we can reconstruct certain things about how they were used. And when you're digging into the past of a given thing, it can be very useful. So archaeologists very often will only have an object that they pulled out of the ground, and they must read that object to learn something about the people who used it, the way it was used, and the broader context can thereby come to life. Now, we do the same thing with etymology. With etymology, we can look at the roots of words. One of my favorites is, the word nice. And nice meant fine or detailed. But by extension, it could also, like, you could talk about nice needlepoint, right? Or nice lace, finely crafted, right? With all kinds of loops and shapes. But that, by extension, came to mean overly concerned with details, or frivolous, right? And somehow, or even foolish or stupid or inane. And somehow it's come to mean what it means today when you say, oh, they sure are nice. But if you look at the roots of the word, you can see the transformations it went through as a semantic category in the culture and the language in question. So we can see the same sort of thing if we look at cattle, chattel, and capital. Those three words are linked together as a form of currency with concepts like head count, right? Or, the tax livestock that we are at this point, being farmed in that fashion. So we know that we can kind of engage in reconstruction with words through etymology. We know that we can do it with material objects by allowing them to flower in our mind, to hold them, to interact with them, and to see how they must have been used. What happens if you put those two things together? What happens if you put the physical objects of material culture together with the words for those things, and you consider both of those things in parallel? Well, that's kind of theoretically an interesting pastime. And that's what I did here. But I did not do it arbitrarily. I decided that I was going to look at horse culture. Now, with horse culture, what you have is the idea of a mounted man, which gives us the concept of a gentleman. Now, in English, we just say gentleman. That's the only vestige of it. But we still have the term cavalier. Now, it gets used in a negative sense to be cavalier about a thing. But if you jump over to French French, where you have cheval for horse, you also have chevalier, right, for a gentleman, an aristocrat, right, someone who is mounted on horseback. It's the same thing we get with the Romans with the equestrian class, right? These are knights, so to speak, in Rome, and the equestrian class forms the basis for the senatorial class. It's the aristocracy from which the brighter lights among them are drawn. We can see it with Spanish, where you have, what is it, caballo, yeah, for a horse, and then you have caballero, right, for a gentleman. So we have the idea of being elevated in status because you are a mounted man. And when I say that I am not approaching this arbitrarily, that's what I mean. What you're looking at on screen before you is the image of a horse. I think this one as a sigil that I created here with a vector illustration program. I think I pulled this from a antique representation of Bucephalus. And this was the horse of Alexander. Now, interestingly, everybody says Bucephalus, he must have been bull-headed, you know, bos for bull and cephalos for head. And this is a horse called Bullhead. Well, that seems silly, odd, and gets explained the wrong way, but it probably has to do with the sign of a bull's head brand on the horse. But anyway, that's what this little sigil was taken from. I found a rendering. Maybe it was on a coin, maybe it was a vase painting or something, but I swiped it. And that is the horse you see in the center. That is the basis of our consideration, the idea that we as Western men made a deal of a kind with animals, and it extends to things like cattle, but it's summarized in terms of our fundamental culture most perfectly with this image of a horse. Now, around the horse, and you can read these signs clockwise, as I will, you have a number of symbols. These symbols are fundamental elements of material culture. Remember, I said that none of this is arbitrary. The idea is to start with something we know we have in our culture, which is the idea of a gentleman on horseback, being on horseback, being elevated, to be mounted, to be a fighting man on horseback. Like we call them knights, right? We call them chevaliers. We have the winged hussars in Poland. We have the equestrian class in Rome. We have mounted knights among the Celts. We have the idea of Arthur and the Round Table. And the idea is that you are a horseman, a knight. Knights on foot never quite rang the same way or resonated the same way in our memory that a mounted warrior does. So the basis is that in our culture, horse culture, which is a unifying feature of Western kind. The thing is that it also extends to Central Asia, which is where we theoretically came from quite some time back, if you want to look back as far as the Yamnaya. Now, that might be a bit before chariots and horse culture, but I doubt it. If, in fact, we don't have evidence from that period, it's probably simply because it hasn't appeared yet. Now, I read about it and promptly forgot, so it may be that you're well into horse culture evidence by that time, but it doesn't matter. The steppes are the place of the horse. We clearly made a deal with the horse and with other herds. We incorporated it into our culture, and it has affected us in innumerable ways. And so what we have here is a memory constellation for our culture, the image of the horse and the signs that represent aspects of material culture that are tied to this. And then, as I said, you have etymology, which is linked to the signs, and you can see the word associations running from left to right in the signs below. So you can work from left to right on the bottom, or you can look at the sigils surrounding the horse and go clockwise. But the first one is milk. And I will be going into each one of these in detail. You won't be looking at this plain white screen forever. But milk is a fundamental aspect, perhaps the most fundamental aspect of our culture. Not only does it mark us as mammals, those who drink from the tit, creatures with fur, and we, of course, look to any other creatures with fur who nurse as being related to us, and we domesticate and raise them, whereas we think of things like insects or reptiles or fish as alien by comparison. So we are the tribe of milk, and milk comes first. Were that not the case, we would not understand enough about the behavior of furry herd animals based on our own experiences that run in parallel, because we share the genetic lineage If we didn't have that, we would not have a basis for understanding them enough to make a deal with them and domesticate them. Well, what comes next? And again, I'll go into all of these in detail in what follows, but we have tag, which is the idea to mark, tagma, damga, tag, tasso. There are a number of etymological roots there, and they all cluster around what I use, mark with a 3-letter mnemonic as tag. The next one is hide, the skin of an animal, which also gives you hide of land, and also hidden, wolf in sheep's clothing. There are a number of elements there that we'll cover. Then bind, then gad, like a gadfly to sting, or ye gads, or the gads, referring to the nails that bound or pinned Christ to the cross. The gad is the spike, the stinging thing, the stimulus, the kentron, the goad. Then you have bit, which is control. You have breeches or break, braque, the idea of trousers, which are a form of dress tied directly to horsemen. Only horsemen wear trousers. And if everybody wants to talk about cultural appropriation, then all the motherfuckers across the globe wearing our blue jeans should fucking take them off. The next sign is sever. Saber, SVR for sword. Then sed, like sedentary, seat, saddle. Then we have stirrup and heel. So each of these symbols, each of these objects, each of these signs that represent an aspect of material culture that really is not in any arbitrary way tied to horse culture is constellated here around the image of the horse. So what I'm getting at here is that we have the words historically that we know we use to refer to these things. And then we have the things themselves represented as signs so they can be held in memory. And then the central object that they cluster around, which is the horse, symbol of our horse culture. Oh, John Ski notes I missed gird, which also gives you garth and garden and ward and warden and girdle. Yes, garden like kindergarten. That is the belt of nobility. We'll be covering that as well. You'll notice that there are 12 signs because memory favors brevity, and 12 is usually the largest set that we can easily grasp in our memory at once. And also, happily, it's rich in factors, allowing it to be divided by 1, 12, 2, 3, 4, and 6, which is far better than base 10 systems, but we don't need to get into all of that. So let me jump over here and give you the image of the key, which should now be visible to you. Let me get it nice and as large here as can be seen. Okay, and I just need to cue up my text here because I'm going to be working from notes. Because the first point about all of this is that I set it up to be a, this is a mnemonic system, and I wanted to make this accessible to me. What a lot of people don't understand is, when you take a look at something like the Kabbalah, whatever you want to call it, and the Sephiroth, the tree of life, the 10 Sephiroth, or 11 if you count Doth, the paths between them, 22 in number, that are said to correspond to the tarot in terms of, late 19th century, early 20th century syncretism, like you see with the Golden Dawn or with Aleister Crowley. Even if you go back further to something that's more genuine, where you have the idea of each of those Sephiroth being a domain, a kind of archetypal realm, and each of them together, each of them covers a specific aspect, and when taken together as a set, they can be used to collate all that is in manifestation and to order it under categories. So in the Sephiroth, you've got the idea of, Keter, the crown, Hokmah and Binah, Chesed and Gabora, mercy and might. These are ideas of domains. Now, you can look at it also in terms of the systems of divine names, where you recite different names of God as you move across a set of beads. Well, in this case, what I did is I stole some of that, or I approached that through a stolen device, which is the Guidonian hand, which was a mnemonic technique using the fingers and the joints as a way to remember music. But I needed a set of 12, and happily I learned that with some Indian traditional music, what they do is they count on the joints of the fingers. So you can move your thumb across the 3 segments of each of your fingers, and it's a quick way in groups of 3 to count through 12. And so in sequence with the thumb on the tip of the index finger, you have milk, then tag, then hide, then bind, then gad, then bit, then break, then gird, then sever, then said, then stir, then hell. And in that system, you have all 12 of these items. Now, this is me being a little bit cute, but the idea is that this is a way to encapsulate and have at one's fingertips, literally, the mnemonic elements that allow you to grasp in your hand, to hold. And that's literally what apprehend and comprehend mean in Latin, is to take in hand. You can take in hand chivalry, and you can do so through a memory tradition. So rather than having recourse to an imported system like the Kabbalah, which comes out of all kinds of Semitic roots, and you can find variants of it that are frankly very much interesting, at least as interesting as the Kabbalistic stuff you have with esoteric heterodox Shiism. And that too comes out of this Semitic system, but I wanted to anchor it in something more tangible, because there's something left of old Rome in me, perhaps in my genetics or whatever. The idea is that it has to be brought to earth. It has to be made tangible. We have to hold it in our hand. And like our hand extended before us into the world of things, it must become a tool. And chivalry was, to whatever extent it was something that was intellectual or spiritual, or something that would be contemplated on some level that extends beyond perhaps the physical. It was always a very physical thing. Being a chivalrous culture gave us success in war. And so you can imagine this as a kind of mnemonic Kabbalah counted on the joints of the fingers, or reckoned, I should say, on the joints of the fingers, to allow us to take in hand, through a system of shorthand note, all of this thing that we conceive of as chivalry, and thereby to get a hold of something that is like the catena, the chain of the cultural elements that lie at the deep roots of our Western culture. So I'm going to jump into that, but before I do, I'm going to give everybody here a moment, and I will close this screen sharing just for a moment, so you don't have to just look at this picture forever. If I can find it, go ahead and let me know, folks, if you have any questions before I move on. This is going to take us a little while. There's a lot of material here, so I should, in theory, be back on screen, and I'm going to give you a few moments to ask any questions if you need any clarification, and then I am going to move on. Let me look at the quotes here. All 12 zodiac signs which represent the personality of man. Yes, the 12 zodiacal signs are definitely something that weighed on this. The zodiac is about animal signs, little animals. And I believe that those animals were representative of concepts and behaviors and even techniques, the way that we have with, for example, monkey kung fu or tiger kung fu, or, crane form, or, the various ways in which human beings use animals to be representative of attitudes, behaviors, or given things. We can say that a person is, a dog-like in their loyalty, or wolfish in their predation, or a woman who's catty. I believe that those signs were an attempt to lay things out in that way, but it goes very deep indeed. As soon as you look at Gemini, then you say, by Jiminy, Jiminy Cricket, Gemini, Jiminy, strange. The twins, who are the twins? Oh, they're the Dioscuri. Right? Oh, the Dioscuri. Oh, well, that gets interesting, because you've got the image of the Dokana, which is a door frame said to represent the twins, the Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, who are Gemini. And that door frame is like a gateway but it looks like the Gemini sign, which isn't so much the number 2 as it is the doorway. And holy shit, linguistically, Gemini is related to Yama, and Yama's the god of death. But wait a minute, Castor and Pollux, the twins, one of them is alive, and he had to share his, or is immortal and had to share his immortality with the other. And so they trade time, one in the underworld and one above the world of men. And it goes with contracts, covenants, the Dioscuri. So as soon as you dig into, that's just one sign out of that zodiac. And in a similar way, though I'm not going to claim so much heritage for what we have laid out here, at least as a formalized system. Of course, the roots of what I'm drawing on are certainly that old. Anyway, I hope that what I'm laying out here has something of that in terms of being something deep that you can dig into. All right, waiting for the closed fist of these icons. There was no version of that I put together, but that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. All right. Nobody is speaking directly about what's on screen, so thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to move on. We will now go back to viewing this on your screens. And off we go. Hopefully you can all see this. So I open this up with the question, where is the horse and where is the rider? The metaphor of the horse and rider, like the earlier metaphor of the chariot and charioteer, which was ancient even when Plato discussed it long ago in Phaedrus, is a central cognitive device or memory image. In Spanish, we have caballo, horse, and caballero, gentleman. In Portuguese, cavalo, horse, and cavaliero, or some shit like that. I can't pronounce Portuguese, certainly. Horseman or gentleman. In French, we have cheval for horse, and we have chevalier for gentleman or knight. In German, reiten is to ride, and ritter is a knight or a gentleman. In English, we have cavalry and chivalry. Clearly, the horseman is a very old and important symbol of individual empowerment. In many cultures, to ride is to be distinguished and elevated. The signs associated with horse culture comprise a book of chivalry. It's only necessary to trace the vestiges of what once was long ago. Chivalry is expressed here as a memory tradition in which a given set of objects, literally material culture, encodes constellated meaning and knowledge. The associated images, signs, and text we present are intended to foster awareness of a whole greater than the sum of its parts, a gestalt view of how deep cultural archetypes sometimes operate continuously, regardless of whether we happen to be aware of it. They're also intended to stimulate the viewer to consider the richness and continuing applicability of these cultural archetypes as a consciously understood heritage, one that lays bare the nature of the social forces in operation around us, regardless of what it may be fashionable to call them today. Now, before I go on, I realized I made an enormous mistake. I forgot to tell you about who painted the images that you're seeing. In this project, I worked with a very talented oil painter named Eric Stevens. Hang on, you know what I need to do? I need to show you the background for this, and then I'm going to pick up on this again. This is my bad. I should be spreading the love, because none of this would have happened had it not been for my friend working with me and doing these paintings to help me realize this vision here. So I'm going to stop it. You're going to be looking at my ugly mug momentarily, and I'm going to go over to the other application screen here. There we go. Share. Boom. Okay, you guys should be able to see what we have here. This is the set of paintings. This was an exhibition long before it became what we're going to discuss this evening, which is this digital thing that has been sitting in a box for years because very few people got exposed to it. So I worked with a very talented oil painter named Eric Stevens. He executed all of the oil paintings that you see in this. You're going to have, these are shots from the exhibition in Texas. You're going to see close-ups of all of these images, so do not feel as though you're, this is the only chance you're going to have to look at it. But the way this was set up was with 12 images and 12 associated texts, and I'll be going through all of them with you. Again, the whole purpose of this was to capture aspects of Western culture, and hopefully to get to a point where they could be held in our hands so that we would have chivalry, so to speak, with all the lessons associated with it at our fingertips. All right, so let me get out of here. Hopefully you guys saw that. Where's my chat window? Did you see it? Okay, good. Hopefully it's all there. All right. So we're going to save our share screen again, and I will continue. So the name of the painter, again, Eric Stevens, Eric K. Stevens. And for those of you who want to follow along, there's a PDF available on his website with his paintings, and it is called Virtue, Chivalry as a Memory Tradition. So if you just go to Google right now and search on Google for the PDF, Virtue, Chivalry as a Memory Tradition, you can pull up the PDF that I will be working from, which I produced. So let me go back over here, share the screen. And this should now be visible again. So where was I? I was just talking about the horse and the rider. And this is an important image to me, because if you get into the esoteric aspects of this, it gets very interesting. So I'm into the material culture. I'm into digging up the old bones of our culture, the shared elements that go with horse culture that reveal our deep-seated relationship in history with the Turks and the Mongols and other steppe peoples. You know, we think so much in the West about the sedentary sort of late horsemen, but in our roots, you know, we came into what is now Europe from points further east, and we brought with us our horse culture, which the Turks share. And when you see things like, you know, milk as the first sign, there's a reason. You know, we drink cow's milk. With the Mongols or the Turks, it might be yogurt or kumis. But since we share that fundamental element, we can trace the set of older relationships. So the esoteric aspect here, beyond, you know, the historical stuff like I just touched on, or, you know, how behavior can be encoded in objects and the mnemonic aspect, there's also the esoteric, which is the idea of the horse and the rider. You know, we don't have a horse mounted on the back of a man. We know that what is right and proper is a man mounted on the back of a horse. And in the systems of esoteric chivalry, which are reflected in Persian and Southwest Asian, and even in some of the Middle East, certainly Anatolia, traditions called futuwah, which is a kind of spiritual chivalry. These things survive, but you have the idea that the rider is the soul and the horse is body. So we can see one of the central myths of the Western man, you know, the idea of Pasiphae and the bull, and how the bull mated with Pasiphae and gave birth to the Minotaur. And the bull was Zeus in his form raping Pasiphae. But Pasiphae is like the Minotaur, the product of the divine and the mortal, is, you know, half animal and half man, and trapped in the labyrinth of manifestation. And so you can look at that version that comes from the ancient Greeks, and certainly from the earlier and much more developed, apparently, Minoan and Cretan culture. You can look there for this lesson about being half man or half animal, or you can jump forward in time to Robert Flood's engravings, where you see a figure who is chained at the wrist to an ape, which is the idea of the soul being bound to the body and having this dual nature. Well, I choose to reflect that same element in this system more simply and economically, I believe, through the image of the horse and rider. The soul should govern the body. The right reason should govern the emotions. You know, this is the image. We say wild horses, you know, getting loose, you know, or torn apart by wild horses. So the horses represent the body and the passions and the fury and the energy of physical manifestation. The rider is the soul that with perfect equilibrium should sit astride that beast and guide it. Hence I ask, where is the horse and where the rider? Here in manifestation or elsewhere? Or do they only come into existence where the horse and rider meet? And who are these things? How are these things? What rides and what is ridden? So the elements on display here, the material objects that preserve and articulate culture expressed in visible images and these graphical signs with the accompanying text, all of these elements on display here have been chosen based on the ancient arts of memory, in which objects and images in space strengthen and order recollection and serve as a basis for compositional invention in the living imagination. They help the viewer to remember and meditate upon the various irreducible elements that come together in the culture of chivalry, both the exoteric and esoteric senses of that word. They're designed to link in non-arbitrary ways with historical realities and to provide the simplest possible key, since memory delights in brevity and conciseness, to a vast interrelated collection of cultural wisdom common to all cultures for whom the riding of horses represented an ideal. So it shows us a stratum that we share with those further east, but that lie in the deepest roots of our own culture. Again, what rides and what is ridden? And there's a great quote I like here. This is from Michel de Montaigne from the 1500s. And it's from his essays. He writes, "Whatever Chrysanthus in Xenophon may say about it, you blend your worth and fortunes with those of your horse. His wounds and death involve your own. His terror or his impetuosity make you either rash or cowardly. If he is hard-mouthed or needs the spur, it is your honor that answers for it." Now, he was talking about how a rider could be pitched from his horse and look like a fool because the horse was not under control. The rider was not riding, not in his proper relationship with the horse, but extend that to the soul and the body, to the reason and the emotions, and you will grasp the esoteric application of the various things I will be covering here. Now, we're going to jump over to the first sign, milk. Hopefully everyone can see that now. Just make sure no one in the chats is saying that they can't see anything. All right, good. Nice. All right. Hands look weird when you look at them for a long time. Yes, it's like saying your name over and over and over again until it means nothing. So you should now see milk. Now, what's interesting about milk, remember I said that we deal with this linguistically as well as through these signs, right? The objects chosen here for good reason are not our Western images. This is a bowl and ladle used by Central Asian steppe dwellers. I think this is from Kyrgyzstan, to ladle milk. And there's a reason that there is the idea of a moon hidden in it. There is a reason that the sign for milk is a hanging tit, but it also looks like the head of a bull. It also looks like a point of moisture about to drop from an orb. There are reasons for that sign, which I think is one of the finest I crafted here. And it is to represent MLK, milk. In Greek, we have gala. In Latin, we have lac, and it's milk. Perhaps you're wondering why it is that for some unknown reason, everybody decided to latch on to the idea of milk as being a sign of white supremacy. Odd that all these lactose intolerant sorts, or those who don't easily have ready access to milk, would somehow resent us for the fact that it's like central to us. And it's certainly no mistake that the fucking social justice warriors with their almond milk and, you know, low-fat milk, white water, and all that other crap are trying to remove us from our relationship with milk, which has made us so strong. Anyway, the first sign is MLK, milk, moloko, Greek gala, Latin lac. Our Milky Way derives from the Latin term Via Lactea, which is what the Latins called the Milky Way. Here the drama takes place. That's why it's the first sign. We must contextualize and orient ourselves. We are here in the universe, but a specific part of it, the Via Lactea. In our galaxy, galaxy being a word which in turn derives from Greek galaxias kyklos, the Milky Circle. Is it just a coincidence, I ask you, people, that we call the part of the vast universe that is our home the place of milk? Surely it's just a coincidence. Surely it's just a coincidence that they hold up glasses of milk and talk about them as a sign of racism. when it's one of the deepest secrets of our culture. And the great twisting branch of life called mammals are those of the breast. We are those who potentially walk upright among those mammals, able to crane our necks towards the milk-filled bowl of the sky. Some of the tribes of the West have been drinking the milk of the kind kin for close to 10,000 years. 10,000 years. Crack your teeth upon the nut of this immense fact and watch the fashions of the day, each a gnat's life, grow gaunt in their ephemeral farce. Milk is food for baby kine, but these our kin consented to the yoke of domestication and gave us milk from their teats. And we, suckling, grew long and strong-boned, square-shouldered and steady. The drinkers of milk have prospered. In exchange, we nursed the gadfly-ridden and drove off predators, culling and killing no more than we needed to eat. That was a long time ago. Today, the cow is caged, and the trust we negotiated with her broken. Some even feed her the ground-up paste of her own. It was likely women who first negotiated our arrangement with these animals long ago, before anyone ever rode a horse. And today, it is women first, with sensitive noses, who turn their heads away from red meat and milk, preferring more fashionable fare. Perhaps this should be noticed, even recognized as a warning. If the symbiosis of man and herd continues to suffer such senile abuse, one of the most basic and ancient of life ways will disappear. When the milk is poisoned, the horns of the moon turn red. The twins of Rome were suckled by a she-wolf, and the milk of wolves runs thick in senile empires. Milk, a noun from Old English mjölk, from Proto-Germanic meluk, Old Norse mjölk, Dutch melk, German milch, Gothic milux. Milk as a verb, from Proto-Germanic melkanan, and compared to Old Norse mjölka, Dutch and German melken, both from Proto-Indo-European base melk, wiping or stroking, referring to the hand motion of milking a teat, compared to Greek amelgein, Latin mulgere, and Old Central Slavic mlesti, Lithuanian meltsu, to milk, Old Irish melk, to milk, Sanskrit marjata, to wipe off. The figurative verbal sense of exploit for profit as a meaning for milk first appears in the 1520s. So perhaps deep in our culture is the sense of milking. The virtue is always the heart of the vice is always the heart of the virtue. And so in keeping herds and milking, we learn to abuse it and exploit it. And the result is cattle, chattel, capital, a captivating misuse of the ars notoria. So that as a kind of introduction to the first sign. The second sign is tag. Hopefully you can see this well. Tag, both the sign and the painting. This is the branding iron. Let me just make sure that I haven't lost anyone over here in the chat window. Okay, it looks like we're still going good. Nice. Okay. So the next sign in the sequence of 12, chivalry at your fingertips, somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 years of culture, all summarized in a set of signs. You can thank me later. Certainly no work was involved in constellating all of this in a non-arbitrary way. You know, and as you can imagine, I was paid well for this because so many people are interested in this. Showing any kind of concern like this is a thankless process. I'm so happy that there are actually a few people here listening to me drone on about it. So this sign is tag. We have Greek tagma and Latin signum, tag. Long ago, we moved together with the great herds. In following them, we learned their ways and to read the marks of their passing. Those who could recognize their signs learned to distinguish, to divide, and to order. The world unfolded the tapestry of its kind in category and instance. We learned to read the sign. And when I say read, I spell that R-E-D-E, which means to judge and to assess and to heed. It only later became read, which means to heed the law, and then eventually R-E-A-D with a different spelling to read as we talk about it today. The roots of what we call read and reading had to do with noticing and heeding and obeying or acting in conformity with whatever was intimated by the sign. This has to do with all of the shit I go into with mark studies. And now I'm going to have to do a little pause here. So I'm going to stop it and you will be able to see my lovely visage here. Okay. If you want to know more about all of that, this is Traditional Marking Systems. I was one of the 3 editors for it. It is a collection of essays by scholars from around the world, many of them from Russia, Central Asia, Europe, and it's all about marks and signs. And I did the introduction to it, and I did the first study, chapter 1, which will go into a lot of what I talk about under this sign of tag. If you want to know more, there's also Remarks. Both of these books are available on Amazon. I'm not trying to sell them to make any money off it because I won't get a penny. Someone else has the rights. I just did the work for free. But Traditional Marking Systems, and this one, Remarks, has a study of marks and how they're used today that's very interesting. You can find those on Amazon. And there's also this one if you want to go get the Elsevier publication, Language Sciences. This is one I did that, you know, got properly peer reviewed and everything as a Festschrift for a Oxford scholar, Roy Harris, who was being celebrated by this issue. So if you're interested in the stuff I'm talking about right now in this image under the sign of tag with the branding iron, those books will help you to find out more about it. So I'm going to go back to the screen share and continue. Okay, so you should now be seeing tag again. So we learned to read the sign. The later more limited sense of read as the interpretation of something written or printed reveals the narrowing of the scope of our attention with the attendant dulling of our wits. Most time it's best not to read what you read. So wolf track equals wolf. The relationship between the sign and what it indicates is not arbitrary. Not only does wolf track point to wolf, the particular track points to a particular wolf. So we developed the use of the mark as an art, learning all of this by reading the signs of animals in their passage. That's why we read letters in text in a sequence, the way we read tracks as we walked along a path in a forest. That is why writing is fundamentally masculine, no matter how good women might get at it. We are the ones who contrived it, and we learned it from animals who taught us to read and write. That's what's so stupid. All the fucking post-Marxist, postmodern, leftist Kabbalists with their jumbling together of letters in universities tell us that language came first. And I'm here to tell you, as a result of my studies, that it did not. Writing came first. Only our false association of writing, or our false conception of writing as a thing made possible by speech, allows us to miss the obvious, which is that we were writing and reading in the sense that animals leave marks and read them, read instead of read. We were doing that long before we ever spoke the first word. Animals in particular don't have spoken language and they all read signs. Why would we be any different? Only man's anthropocentric, masturbatory self-congratulation leads us to believe that we're somehow different. And it's that same worship of the text, devoid of any meaningful connection with reality, that allows those who come from the religion of the book to be, and those who come after them, in their secular variations, to be ripped up from their roots in real experience. So, and then this is why I said wolf track equals wolf, because you can say that, well, I write the word wolf and it brings to mind a wolf, and that's how writing works. Well, that's cute, but when you've actually been out there and you can say, wow, that track shows a big wolf, and he's an old wolf and he's a male, and his gait as represented in the tracks left in the ground indicate that he's aggressive. We think that the words stand for all those things with just category and instance, but in our oldest form of writing and reading, which is reading the signs, the specific wolf was indicated by its mark, not just wolf in general. So we developed this use of the mark as an art, elevating it beyond its beginnings in animal, territorial, and environmental marks. We learned to mark objects, places, and people, hence the branding iron. We learned to tag them, but tagma is about order and categories, which is tagma. It comes from the same Greek roots as tasso and tax. To tax is to mark, to show ownership. We say words like consignment or to consign, to send someone somewhere with a mark, consignum, or to charge them. To charge them means to make them bear a weight or bear a mark. And we have people who've been punished by having M for malefactor or V for vagabond burned into them. So official seals. Oh, I'm sorry. We learned how to mark objects, places, and people. And with the modern brand, we have learned how to mark minds. Official seals, monograms, heraldic and military insignia, tax stamps, license plates, cattle brands, corporate insignia, all are marks we use to organize the space around us and the objects within it. At the deepest level, neither written nor spoken language applies. Here we enter the realm of the territorial mark that provokes aggression. Look at how people react if you simply raise up a swastika banner. They'll freak out and start foaming and screaming and attacking. Look at how you can take sheaves of paper covered with confusing black marks and make someone almost fall down to death with terror. If you've ever been served with a suit, you know it's not what's in the suit that matters. It's that someone showed up at your house holding up a sheaf of papers with baneful samata, with evil marks upon them. And you know that there is a spell that's been cast against you in the form of this suit. They display to you the marks that have been scribbled against you. Of course, we'll all say, oh, what is he talking about? He's insane. No, this is what lies at root in our experience of all of these things. All these marks that I mentioned, the corporate insignia and the rest, as I said, neither spoken nor written language applies to them. There's something before spoken language. Here we enter the realm of the territorial mark, as I said, provoking aggression. It's like a trap baited with sex scent that draws prey, or the hierarchical disposition of piss marks on trees. Now, I don't go into the detail here, but the bottom line is that animal territorial marks that are visible come out of animal territorial marks that are scent-based. We just happen to be highly visual creatures. As primates, we look for colored fruit that we can identify in our environment. We have a weak sense of smell. With animals that mark with scent, they mark the objects in their environment and order their space in that way. Since we have weak noses, we mark it with visible signs. But there is, of course, a real issue with the way in which we sometimes combine them. So in our bathrooms, in a public restroom, at a bar, you're going to see all kinds of aggressive and sexual remarks scratched into the wood of the bathroom stalls, like an animal scratches into the bark of a tree. And it's all at the spot where the overlapping scent signatures of a bunch of people pissing in the same place indicate that there's competition for status. I can't go into this, or we won't be able to get through all the different images, but this is a very, very deep one of the symbols that indicates how we order our lives. These are the signs that organize us into demographic groups. Greek demos for common people, people designated categorically, plus graphein to represent by written characters. A demographic is certainly is a summary of the desires. When we say a demographic, to refer to a group of people, but of course it's really it's not a noun. But when you make it a noun, you're referring to the sheets of paper that describe the psychological and financial and emotional characteristics of a group of people. They're summarized by a sign. They can be dealt with by head count. They're cattle, chattel, capital. By contrast, instead of being a person with a bad character who needs to be given a character, having it imposed upon them, the noble man, the chivalrous man, the one who is on top of the horse instead of allowing the passions to ride him, the one who stands apart, who is unique, who is self-governing, the archetype of the empowered Western male, that person is a man of character. Coming back again to tag as character. The character of the chivalrous man is unique. It can be shared with no other. This is excellence of character. The bad character is one that is shared, one that is held in common. The worst character is that imposed on others, like M for malefactor or V for vagabond that I mentioned earlier. Remember all of this that I have said, or as Polonius said to Laertes, look thou character, which means impress this upon your memory, mark your memory with this character, and thereby gain character by remembering something that matters and organizing your behavior around it so that you're not simply a victim of your passions and instincts. In summary, we have the word tag. We've got tagma from Greek, which means ordinance, command, fixed assessment or payment, body of soldiers, division, brigade, generally an arrangement, possibly of footprints, status, or function. Compare these to Turkish tamga, which means clan sign, Mongolian tamaga, which means clan sign, horse brand or banner sign. And we can see with the Poles, they call it tamga as well for the house signs that are called Hausmarken among the Germans. This all points to the fact that we share this culture across Central Asia, and Turks are related to us culturally. We can look at Afghani tagma, which is metathesis, going from tamga to tagma. Related to this is tactics, from modern Latin tactica, from Greek taktike, techne, art of arrangement, from taktikos, of or pertaining to arrangement, especially tactics in war, from taxis, order, verbal noun of tasein, to arrange, from Proto-Indo-European base tag, to set aright, compared to taxonomy, all tied to tag. Also token, from Old English taken, sign, symbol, evidence, related to taken, show, explain, or teach, from Proto-Germanic taiknan, compared to Old Slavic or Old Scandinavian, one or the other. Yeah, Old Scandinavian, that can't be the word. It wouldn't say Scandinavian, it'd say Norse. It must be Old Slavic, tekan, Old Norse taken, for zodiac sign, omen, or token. Old Frisian, Middle Dutch, teken, Dutch teken, Anglo-Saxon takna, Old High German zeichen, German zeichen, Gothic teken, sign or token, from Proto-Indo-European base dake, to show, compared to teach, the verb. Old English taken, to show or point out, also to give instructions, from Proto-Germanic taikigenon, from Old High German zihan, German zeichen, to accuse. Gothic getaihan, to announce, from Proto-Indo-European dake, to show, point out. Related to Old English taken and teken, sign or mark. That is the tag. And now we jump to the next one, which is hide. And I may not be able to get through all of these. I may just do a couple more, and you guys can seek out the full document and go through it now that it has been explained, because I'm going to put everyone here to sleep. All right. It looks like some people are following this. All right. Well, I'll keep going for a couple more of these, and we'll see if anyone is interested. But I don't think I'm going to get through all 12, because I will be here all night. All right. So you should now be able to see hide, which is another one of these symbols in my set. Again, we're talking about material culture as a key to explore this down into the past. And we're also talking about the linguistic element and bringing them together. So with hide, we have the Greek word metis, the Latin word kaleo, which I characterize as cunning. Odysseus Polymetis, who epitomized the Greek ideal of cunning, introduced himself to the Cyclops as no man, which in the original Greek was outis, and in a later passage, the variant metis, also no one or no man, a clear pun in the original Greek of Homer for metis, cunning intelligence. Odysseus and his men blinded the one-eyed Polyphemus and escaped by hiding in his flock as it exited the cave. Think, too, of the Trojan horse, how warriors were hidden in the body of a horse, covered in its false skin, so to speak, and how foundational it is to the idea of Western cunning. He who stands atop a hide dances on the back of a bull. A hide of land is the amount of space a family requires to live as recognized by ancient law. But to grasp the dimensions of that hide and how it is to be deployed in the world, one must know and understand the story of the Carthaginian queen Dido Elissa and the ox hide. When she arrived with her weary people in what was to become Carthage, she requested as refuge only as much land as could be covered by an ox hide. The people that she was negotiating with foolishly agreed. So she got the largest ox hide she could find, and she took out a bronze razor, and she took it to the hide and cut it into a single paper-thin long strip. Now you can find out more about that paper-thin long strip under the symbol BND for rope, which is bind, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. So she took that long string, so to speak, that she made from the giant ox hide, turning it into a cord, and using that, she encircled the top of the highest hill, claiming the entire hilltop, and thereby won refuge. She changed the dimensions of the exchange. Now, of course, exchange in European languages, you can take a look at bors and bursa and bursa and purse, which is the idea of a skin pouch that holds money. The same hide forms the basis of shield and shelter. We are wrapped in an ox hide shield 7 layers thick when we fall through the stars, drugged senseless again by Lethe. This is the skin that conceals by revealing, the wolf in sheep's clothing. Odysseus also enclosed the Greeks in the wooden skin of a horse, and Cyrus, the Great of Persia, long before him, carefully left the gods of each conquered state's pantheon in place. He simply took his place among them. The etymology of hide comes from the roots of cover and conceal, a Persian mountain tradition. We can compare this to takiye. We even call our flags our colors, and yet motorcycle gangs with their jackets that have the sign of their group on the back call them colors. A curiously persistent archaic remnant. Etymologically, the hide as a concealing cover, the roof, cloak, and shield relates to heraldry, the blazon on the shield, and in Latin for shield you say scutum, which is skin, and flags, which we call colors. Now, color goes with kaleo, which means it ties to some of the etymology that we're about to take a look at. The flags, which we call colors, like a skin held aloft. If these colors conceal by revealing and reveal by concealing, what then are our true colors? Hide as a verb from Old English heiden, from West Germanic huthjanan, from Proto-Indo-European kuth. Compare this to Greek kuthein, to hide or conceal, from the base skew, to cover, conceal. Hide as a noun from Old English hid, hide, from Proto-Germanic hudiz. Compared to Old Norse huth, Old Frisian head, Middle Dutch hut, German haut for skin, related to Old English verb heiden, to hide, the common sense being covering, from Proto-Indo-European base skew, to cover, conceal, compared to Sanskrit kosta, enclosing wall, or skunati, covers, Armenian q for ruth, Latin cutis for skin, scutum for shield, obscurus for dark, Greek kitos for a hollow vessel, kutho to cover, to hide, Russian kishka for gut, Lithuanian, or literally sheath, Lithuanian kiautas for husk, and kutis for stall, Old Norse sky for cloud, Middle High German hod for scrotum, Old High German skura, German scheuer for barn, Welsh kudio to hide. I'm sure I've just absolutely butchered all those foreign words, but you get the point. Download the PDF if you want to read it. And color as a noun, from Old French couleur, from Latin color, accusative colorem, color or hue, from Old Latin colos, originally a covering, akin to celare, to hide or conceal, from Proto-Indo-European base kel, to cover or conceal. Hence, at the outset, why this is hide, Greek metis, Latin kaleo, cunning. All right, I'm going to do one more, just one more. We'll do bind, which will get us through 3 of these. So we'll get through, no, 4 of these. So we'll be getting through more than 1 digit. And I think that will be more than enough. And I will take questions. So the next one of these that we will cover, and the last, again, if you want to find this, just go online and do a search for Virtue, Chivalry as a Memory Tradition, and you will find a PDF that has the images and a lot of this text. I did it sometime back in cooperation with a very talented oil painter named Eric K. Stevens. Okay, so where is bind? All right. Now this one was taken from a rodeo man's rope, which was surprisingly stiff. The painter had to get a hold of the original one in order to be able to paint it from the real thing. And I was really surprised what these ropes were like. You can see the sigil for it that I created at the top. It's self-evident that should be that that is a rope. And of course, the rope of binding here before us, another central element of Western culture, another central element of horse culture, which is at the roots of Western culture, and one of the tools of the horsemen. Now, I'll grant you that, milk was pretty kind, or I should say milk was neutral and had positive aspects. Tag that we looked at seemed very dark. Well, so did hide in a number of respects. So too will bind. But the bottom line that all of us try to hide from is that we come from a very dark, very cunning, very oriented for advantage kind of people. And so these signs that we're going to consider here are dark in many respects. There are others that are in this set that are not so dark, like gird, which is related in some ways to bind, because you can gird yourself with a belt, and that belt that you gird yourself with is in some sense item that binds you. So there are overlaps between these different symbols in the set that can be meditated upon. One of the problems is that the deeper this stuff goes and the less arbitrary it is, certain features emerge out of it that I didn't even see in creating it that become rather interesting. So, okay, the next symbol is bind, B-N-D. We've got Greek deo and Latin ligo, meaning bind. To bind is to bend, to entangle and knot. It is also to bring together the band based on shared bonds. We see the same in Latin ligo, to bind, and ligamen, a bond, providing the basis for our word league, as well as ligament. While in Greek we see lugizo, bend or twist, throw or master, and lugo, tie fast, bend or overpower. The bonds that bind us are not always physical. A far more effective tool for binding across generations is the word. A cruel master whenever it is forgotten that the image always precedes it. Latin lego means read, as well as gather and collect. And in that to read is to form a judgment or take counsel. Words bind our thoughts and actions. The dwarves, goaded by gold, found a way to bind the wolf, the wild wolf, Fenrir. The bond of their making was named Gleipnir. This well-spun yarn was made of 6 things that were never seen in this world. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the milk of a bird, the breath of a fish, and the nerves of a bear. Compare Barsarkar, neither fire nor iron told upon them. What is most wild, the wolf of old night, is bound fast by fantasia. Words are spells. Words spell spells. The stake, any conviction, anchors our fetters, which themselves fix the radius of our possible action. Meanwhile, we run first this way and that, blind to the fact, barking like dogs on a chain. Of course, this describes a perfect circle in the dust, which we've all seen, where a dog chained to the ground runs in circles around the thing that pins him to the earth. It forms a perfect circle because we are bound. Look to the image if you want to understand what I'm talking about. The same chord serves as measure. The knotted cingulum or cingulum was used as basis for laying out the fire altars of old among the ancient worshippers who had Vedas as their sacred texts. In this respect, it is a rule. Compare sutra and suture. The image also subsumes spinning and the manufacture of cloth. Here again, we find text and textile. And the mudra of the upraised hand with thumb touching the middle finger is the Buddhist sign of teaching. But this is nothing other than the gesture of the spinner as she guides the thread. The same gesture signifies the following again of such a thread in recollecting the contents of memory and presenting them to an audience. Knowledge of BND, bind, reveals the spin doctor as a leech. Compare gird, GRD. So you can see how this is both the rope of binding, which goes with horse culture. You need it to lasso, to handle cattle, to control animals, but it also becomes a way to bind. You can extend it to the harness of the animal, which is formed of rings and belts. So you have a cinch strap around the main body of the animal. You have bridles. You have all sorts of things associated with tack that bind in a loop, that contain and restrain, that bind with bonds. And even the rings that allow the leather come together are parts of those bonds and bindings. And we represent those metaphorically when we make oaths to bind ourselves one to another. Instead of having a ring from a piece of harness, we have an iron ring originally of Roman citizenship. We have a gold ring that we slip on our finger to symbolize an oath that we make of binding one to another. That is why it is the circle. And a figure like Tolkien, who was steeped in all sorts of these etymological relationships, said one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. It is the ring that can be a positive binding, like a league, in league, or a band of brothers tied fast by bonds of friendship, but also the binding that holds people down and makes them subservient. So we have band as a noun, Old Norse band, thin strip that ties or constrains, from Proto-Germanic bindan, related to modern English bend and bind, from Proto-Indo-European bend, to bind. Also an organized group from Middle French bande, traced to the Proto-Germanic root of band, possibly from a band of cloth worn as a mark of identification by a group, and or as a metaphorical extension of the idea that such men are bound together. Compare Gothic bandwa for a sign. Then we have bond as a noun, that with or by which a thing is bound, anything that binds, phonetic variant of band, influenced by Old English bonda, householder, literally dweller. Compare this to husband, husbonda, male head of household. We have bind as a verb, to make fast with a band or bond. Old English binden, to tie up with bonds, literally and figuratively. Also to make captive, to cover with dressings and bandages. Old English bindere, one who binds. Cf. bindle, bundle, bandage, and bondage. Then we have bend as a verb from Old English benden, to confine with a cord. Causative of bindan, to bind, from Proto-Germanic base band, string or band. Compare Old Norse benda, to join, strain, strive, or bend, from Proto-Indo-European base bend. Compare Gothic binden, Old High German bintan, Sanskrit bandnati, binds, Lithuanian bendras, partner, and Old Persian bandaka, subject. So we have been through milk and tag and hide and bind. So 4 of these we have been through, and the basics of this system and the various signs collected together should be apparent. And we have this idea of a key, to have all of these elements at our fingertips, to be able to reach into culture. And again, this is something that is, as far as I can tell, non-arbitrary. I chose to follow the tracks left in the sand of the past by our own words. And I chose to follow cultural features that we know our ancestors were involved with. So I'm looking to the things that we know our ancestors used, the horse culture aspects, the objects, the saddle, the stirrups appearing rather late, probably no earlier than about 400 AD. But the heeled boot is another one that's covered. The saddle, the stirrup, the sword, the belt or girdle, the breeches, the rope, the goad or kentron, the bit, the hide, the tag or branding iron, and milk itself, all centered around the image of the horse. And so I know this may be a little bit much for all but a few of you, but I wanted to lay out how I did this, what approach I take, what took, what elements I tried to put together, because in large part we're engaged in a process of attempting to reconstruct our past, the history of our people, of Western kind, if you will. And in the course of that, if we look to the historical texts, there's quite a bit to be learned. And obviously I had recourse to them when I looked at the etymological meanings and all the rest. And I rely upon a whole lot of hard work, much of it possibly misinterpreted by me, but a lot of hard work done by academics and who look at linguistics and etymology, comparative linguistics, historical linguistics. But the bottom line is that this is anchored in material culture. And if you want to call bullshit, just go use the object, because scholars can write about it all day long. But when you milk a cow or skin one or hunt beneath camouflage or use a bit or handle a sword or find out physically how a heeled boot changes how you move. And believe me, I've found out all about it, because the flamenco shoe is a tool. Most people don't know that our shoes in the West are a tool that's unique to our culture. Nobody wears the kind of footwear that we do. And it's a horseman's footwear with a heel designed to go over a bar stirrup that raises us up, that changes our posture and our actions, that changes things like how we choose to fight. All of these things are knit together in these systems, and I wanted to, or this system, which is a construction of mine, but again, not an arbitrary one. And so if nothing else, you can, of course, explore the system I laid out, but also using these techniques, you can create one of your own for yourself. And now I will return from this screen share, and I will be on screen with you here. And I will take a look at the comments that have come in. All right, so what have I missed? I wonder how many people are watching this. I would be very surprised if it's more than 2. Let me see here. Good God, 50 people. That's shocking. Okay, so there it is, ladies and gentlemen. I have a little bit of time and we can sort of shoot the shit for, I don't know, another half hour or something like that. And I'd be happy to talk with you. If you have questions or things, ideas that came up out of what I was talking about. I thought at first foolishly that I was going to go through this and lay into all 12 of these images. And yeah, by number 4, it begins to be a bit much. Somebody says, you seem to be on the same page as Survive the Jive. I have looked into a lot of the same things he has. I'm not currently in academia. I'm not sure that he is either, but he was certainly involved with it more recently than I am or have been. But yes, I use a lot of the kinds of sources that he looks at, you know, Mallory and Adams, the Indo-European material, lots of that kind of stuff. Nick McNickface says, great work. I thank you very much. If anybody can see what's going on there and enjoy it, it works for me. I think it's time for me to have another drink while you guys post some questions, and we'll hang out here for just a little bit longer and see what specific things we can engage with here. Mr. Ixme says, maps of the universe or of human experience, like the Zodiac and the Kabbalah. Yes, but I wanted to make one. Like, to use the simple act of trying to make one for myself, but again, to do it in a way that isn't arbitrary, was well worth the time it took, not only because it allows me a set of mnemonic tools to help me follow or to retain all of the stuff that I uncovered in the course of researching this, but also because it gives me a way to think about others who have done similar things and to understand what might well be going on there. You know, having undertaken this process, modest as it is, if I take a look at, for example, the Zodiac and the different variations of it, if I look at a Chinese Zodiac versus a North Indian Zodiac versus a European one versus whatever from the roof of the temple at Dendara or Dendra or whatever in Egypt, each of the Zodiacs is different. And now, because I've assembled one of these sets sort of my own, you know, it's not informed by the long tradition and the various forms of inspiration that were probably a part of all of that, but you know, in my own modest way, it's my attempt. And so now when I go look at these things that were produced in the past or by other cultures, I have kind of it's like, unless you fooled around with boxing, you know, you don't have a full appreciation for what's happening when you get punched in the face. I don't know. That didn't quite make sense. But I think you folks get the point. So any other, oh, good God, it's like a ringing bell. Any other further questions, ladies and gentlemen? Please forgive me my foolishness. What else do we have here? Alvacara says, my ancestors came from all over Europe. Oh, he's talking to someone else here. Ian Wilmans asks, to what extent would you say these signs might be psychologically ingrained in a Jungian sense, or are they born out entirely through human culture? Well, that's that whole chicken and the egg thing, you know. Really, ultimately, it comes down to whether or not Aristotle's position and Plato's position were really mutually exclusive. You know, do we populate the memory based on experiences that happen through the senses in the Aristotelian sense, or does it come pre-populated by things that exist on some other plane that are more real in the Platonic sense? Well, what if it's both? So the answer to the question, you know, are they ingrained in a Jungian sense, or are they born out entirely through human culture? The answer is yes. I mean, it's the simplest way to say it. Both, and quite possibly even neither. All right, so what else do we have here? I look like I could be Circassian. I'm a little taller than most Circassians. I've met a few Circassians, and some look surprisingly, they look like there was a whole lot of Turkic admixture. Some of them look like lots of Slavic admixture. But I met a few too who seem to be a particular, they look like a European type. They're some European, they're Europeans who aren't Indo-European or something like that. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. It's the only way I can kind of get it across. But most of them were shorter. I found them to be very, very polite people. The few who I engaged with, very concerned about good manners and hospitality, and very interested in their own culture and fighting against terrible odds. You know, everyone goes on about Armenians and Jews and how they suffered, but the Circassians got fucked. I mean, fucked. And still nobody wants to talk about it. What else do we have here for questions? Is there a relationship between the Greek centaurs and the horse plus rider theme from the Proto-Indo-Europeans, or does that myth grow from something else? You know, that question is from Kriegsgalder. Kriegsgalder. God, they always hang on consonants and stuff. Kriegsgalder. The centaurs. Well, what's interesting is kentron means goad. So stimulus means goad. We didn't get to that image, but there is one in there, and it's gad, goad, kentron, stimulus. So when we say stimulus, we're talking about stimulate and the rest, but the Latin word stimulus means cattle goad. And the Greek word kentron means cattle goad. So if you take kentauros, it means bull goad. So the word kentar, or kentauros or whatever, it means bull goad, or maybe bull, those who goad bulls. So it doesn't mean half horse, half man. How would something with taurus in it mean half horse, half man? It's ridiculous. So there's something going on there. I think obviously very early on you see in the artwork that they're represented as half man, half horse. But, you know, I think there are certainly those who have hypothesized that, you know, when seen from afar by those who didn't have horse culture, someone mounted on horseback could seem to be half one thing and half another. It bears more looking into. I only looked into it a little bit, but I immediately saw that kentron and tauros, or whatever, taurus, went together to give us kentauros, which doesn't mean half man, half horse. It means bull goader, which means bull driver, which means bull herder, which means kentaur means something like cattle man. So it needs more looking into. Mr. Ixme, no, I'm not drinking from a mason jar. That's a brown sugar syrup I rendered for my for my old fashioned. I'm out of ice now, but that's all right. I'll suffer through it for all y'all's sakes. All right, what else do we have here? Ali, as you were talking about the sign, mark, and the bind symbols, you were describing the aspects of Tantra and also their interdependent connections. Yes, quite. It's so nice to talk to someone who's also looked into these things. Tantra, as you must know, means web, which goes into all the stuff of binding, various kinds of bonds. And of course, yoga itself means union. So Tantra is a web and yoga is union. And yoga as union also gives us the Indo-European words for yoke, which means to bind the energy of, to harness. So yeah, they are all tied. JR says, so apparently the Estonians have the highest levels of Yamnaya blood. I don't know how you would possibly determine who has Yamnaya blood unless somebody's like sequenced DNA from some Yamnaya burial, which I have not heard anything about. What you may be thinking about is that it's not Estonians, but Latvians or Lithuanians. One of them have the most, like one of the purest, not purest, but an Indo-European language that maintains a bunch of archaic features of Indo-European languages that survive nowhere else. But I haven't heard anything about Estonians having Yamnaya blood. Proud White Settler asks, what am I drinking? That is a old-fashioned. But I didn't clean the glass out or change my ice, so it's got 2 chunks of orange in it. Am I familiar with WHGEEFANE? I'm not sure what those, the genetic markers maybe? Crickset is asking, are you familiar with a bunch of acronyms, migrations into Europe, and the resultant ethnicities that came about due to these migrations? I've read a little bit about genetics, but because I don't have it anchored in any certain knowledge about genetics, it's hard for it to stay. Memory always sort of accretes on other things that you've laid down as foundations. And because I haven't had a proper education in genetics yet, if in fact that's what you're referring to with those acronyms, which I suspect, no, I'm fairly ignorant in that respect. Have I done, JR asks, any reading into the furthest reaches of the info on Aryans, like in Western China, Siberia, and Mongolia, and also the Greek influence on Pakistan, Northern India, and the early Greco-Buddhists? I've read a little bit on those things. There are the mummies of Urumqi and the Tarim Basin that I've looked at a bit. The Sogdians, who are an Indo-Iranian people, run all the way up into Western China. The Xiongnu, or tribes that harried the Chinese on their western borders, also appear to have something to do with the ancestors of people who are today in the West, but there are branches of them that went further east. I think a lot of them just eventually became the Turks after being there that long and interbreeding with people further east. They kind of became the Turks and then came back west. But I mean, this is all highly speculative. Yes, I have looked into that kind of thing a little bit. There's the Bactrian stuff. There's things going on in Afghanistan. And as you said, parts of India, the leftovers of Macedonians who went in with Alexander and the rest. I would not say that I am a expert on any of that. I'm not even all that familiar with any of it. So to hell with expert, but I've heard a bit of it. Mr. Ixme asks, how did you approach this project? What was my process? Well, I started with a chariot, actually. And because we have the symbol of chariots, it appears that people were riding in chariots before they were riding on horseback from the evidence that we have. But there's probably no way to be sure. Many of the things that might be used in riding on horseback, if anything was used at all, other than simply clinging to the mane, were made with organic materials and so would not survive. So it's in question. You know, I've had some arguments with Tim about this, you know, whether it was chariots first or just on the backs of the animals. and whether it was even horses first, because you have a lot of old finds that where people are putting fake horns as part of the headdress on the horses, like you see it with the Pazyryk finds. But anyway, so that question, which came first, the chariot or the horse, I'm not quite sure. I ended up going for the horse alone because we don't have as recent a memory of chariots. Even by the time of Caesar, the fact that the inhabitants of the British Isles were still using chariots was like just this quaint example of how backwards and archaic they were when the Romans encountered them. Now, mind you, the Romans got their asses kicked. They, basically hung out for a little while, beat the people back without being hammered too badly, and then they quickly left, and Caesar declared victory. I mean, it was only much later that they got a strong foothold there. So, despite the fact that they were quaint and archaic in enjoying chariots, they still were kicking ass and taking names. But anyway, so I chose to do this with the horse because it's a simpler figure. It has more of an emotional connection. If you show a chariot, then you have to go show a horse to go with the chariot. There's a number of interesting elements that you get there because you have the axle, you have the chariot pole, you have the yokes, you have the hubs and the wheel, and that symbolism all by itself is like another set. But I opted to back up from that because it's not as familiar to most people. But you do have the symbol of the chariot, which is like a different version of. It's another way to characterize a lot of these things because you have harness and binding and the rest, but you have the wheel, which is rather interesting. Otherwise, I came to this because I was collecting antique stuff. So, over my shoulder here, the dummy that you see, which is a Caucasian, it's a bunch of clothing and equipment from the Caucasus, probably around 1900, anywhere from, I want to say 1890, but it's not that old. It's going to be like 1910 to 1920, somewhere in there. I was collecting all that kind of stuff with weapons and armor and all the rest, and I was getting into material culture. So when I talked at the beginning about how a certain hilt works or how you hold a certain weapon, and it teaches you of itself if you just sit down and clear your mind and make sure you don't have a bunch of noise and annoyance and actually pay attention to the antique object, you kind of meditate with it. And at the same time, I was looking at the etymology and going crazy with the paths you can wind down. Most people don't bother doing that. And so they miss, I think, a lot of important things. And that was the general approach to it. I don't know if that's really helpful. Nick McNickface asks, Ollie, do you consider unmanifest space to extend a primal mark throughout all apparently differentiated phenomena? Well, that's kind of like that line out of the old Coil song, one sees the whole move, every part stands still. Well, yeah, but the kind of mark that the cause and principle and unity of all that comes into being would leave behind is the kind of mark that reveals by concealing, that conceals by revealing, something that is invisible because it's everywhere. Binary Epidemic asks, Ollie, do you have any wisdom to share on the differences or developments from Southern Appalachian chivalry culture and their Scottish Highland ancestors, or subsequently Indo-European ancient ancestors? I'm sorry to say I don't. I've been into Appalachia a little bit, and I think I've mentioned in other streams or discussions that, like, for me to feel at home, I need to be sort of, a good stone's throw from the Appalachians, because that's the feeling of the country I've always lived in, Georgia and Virginia. And but I don't know much about Appalachian culture proper, or how chivalry survived there, or anything about the nature of Scottish Highlanders coming over. I mean, I remember hearing things about like the clan cross that burns that everybody talks about. That actually comes from the clans in Scotland burning the cross of St. Andrew atop hills or mountains to signal an invasion or the need to call up people to respond. I mean, I hear little bits and things, but I'm not knowledgeable enough about it. What are my thoughts on how the myth of the Minotaur came about? That from Elva Carol 555. I don't know. I'd have to riff on that. I'd have to get my mind right and think about it, and something may well come to mind. But as best I know, a lot of people don't know that there was a Greek world at least as far back as like 1300 BC, at least as far back. And they were trading with the Egyptians and the rest at Thera, even though just the rim of the island, the top part of the volcano remains. In Crete and Cyprus, there are vestiges of the culture in the Mediterranean of the ancient Greeks. We think about the Archaic period, and then you start thinking about things like what's his name, Pericles, and the golden age of Athens, and Thucydides, or you say I'm going to go back really far and I'm going to think about like Herodotus, or I'm going to think about Hesiod and the Works and Days, or Theogony, or whatever, and all that shit is late. Even Homer, what is it, 1100 to 700 BC estimated the oral forms of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and probably a number of other stories that have also been lost in that canon were circulating in oral form. We're talking several hundred years even before that. And there was a whole different alphabet, Linear B, that was used to write Greek. And all of it disappeared with the invasion of the Sea Peoples, maybe when Thera blew its dome, what's Santorini today. So looking back into that, there's not enough for me to get my teeth into. Linguistically or in terms of material culture, to really understand the milieu in which this story of the Minotaur appeared. We just have the vestiges that survive in the Greek version of the myths, but the Greek versions of the myths must have been echoing something that had to do with the Cretan and Minoan stuff going on there. I will tell you, though, that if you look at the material culture from that area and from way back when, they have rapiers. They have fucking bronze rapiers. So these same people from these islands in the middle of the Mediterranean, who are known for dancing on the backs of bulls, which survives with like flamenco dance and gypsy toreadors and all this stuff in southern Spain, or even in the bull culture in the Camargue in southern France near Arles. Back in the day, they didn't hurt the bull. They didn't wound the bull or damage it. They would just boldly, half naked, leap and dance over the back of a charging bull. Now, people with that grace and that acrobatic skill, being armed with a 4-foot-long bronze rapier, there is something to looking at that old material culture of the very ancient Mediterranean Europeans that, or I'd guess Europeans of some form. Man, it bears looking into. All right, what else do we have here? If only we could speak the proto-language like we do with Latin. Yeah, well, I can't even speak Latin. I can't even read Latin. El Vaquero gets around. I like vaquero, buckaroo, horseback, horse culture. Didn't even occur to me. Yeah, it would seem like it would fit perfectly for El Vaquero. You should be here. All right. Chad Yamnaya horseman versus virgin early European farmer. Nice. If I may suggest checking out Pierre Grimes if you're interested in the Minotaur. Well then, ladies and gentlemen, bear with me. You guys can blame Nick McNickface for this, but I'm going to make a note in here so I can go and get the book. Pierre. Done. Okay. Kriegsgalder. Do you consider yourself an occultist? No, but I have interested myself. I would have in the past said yes when I was a teenager and probably up into my, I don't know, first third of my 20s. But then that such terminology I'm every bit as weird as I was then, but the term occultist just doesn't, I'd have to sit here and think, having had now 3 whiskeys, I'd have to think too long to say exactly why I don't like that term. But I don't, and I'm not going to waste your time thinking through it right now. Okay, so El Vaquero says there was a VE 717 in 1450 BC. Yeah, and they're not sure when that was. And there was also what they call the invasions of the Sea Peoples recorded in Egyptian art. So yeah, there was a dark age when everything kind of like goes off the map for a while. And it happened somewhere in there between like 1500 and 1100 BC. You know, there's probably been a number of studies done since I last looked at it that pinpoint the time of the occurrence much more closely, but I have not checked into it. All right, what else do we have here? Nick Face signing out. Take care, man. Thank you very much for dropping in. It was my pleasure to answer your questions. Okay, GSP says, check out Alexander Dugin's Pneumachia lecture series, especially about the shift from Kybalion to Apollonian. Kybele. Sybil, yeah, or not Sybil, Kybele, yeah. To Apollonian female, male in Greek culture. I'll check him out, man. I don't know what I think of Dugin yet. I really don't. And I do not fucking trust Russians. I will tell you, they're one of the many ways that I differ from most of the conventional alt-right is the idea that, you know, Vladimir Putin is really a nationalist. And yeah, but I will check it out. I'm not dismissing it. I need to look. My mind is not yet made up about him. I think there's certainly much more going on there than I've caught because I have not properly looked at it yet. That kind of bullfighting is rare, but there is still the bullfighting that looks more like gymnastics instead of murder. I agree. Binary Epidemic talks about Appalachians. Again, I would tell you to look into buck dancing if you want to understand Appalachia and all this culture. I can give you this. So to the binary epidemic, there is a thing in Appalachia called buck dancing. Do not get confused about any of the other crap. There's a bunch of stuff that's of more modern vintage that goes under that name. What I'm talking about was where they get out with their, you know, hard-soled shoes on a piece of plywood or boards thrown down on the ground or up on a tabletop in Appalachia, and they do things that are more like Irish jigs, but they're knocking out a beat on the wooden surface, and it throws a rhythm and it contributes to the music, and they get to dance with it. It's very much like flamenco or tap dancing, but it comes out of older Irish certainly culture, and maybe some other ones, but Irish for sure, because it can be, a lot of the rhythms and things can be directly related to Irish dancing. So yeah, check out buck dancing, brother man. Charles Marlowe in the house. Hello, sir. JR, I can imagine a great figure to survive the jive and Sticks. I've talked to Sticks once. I'd talk to him again. I'd like to talk to Survive the Jive, though. It would be interesting, though, to have a topic beforehand. All right. Proud White Settler says, a couple of my brothers were into chariot racing when they were younger, still popular in some areas of the western U.S., a real rush. A light chariot but behind a couple of doped up quarter horses. Hell yeah, man. And you know what's a trip when you look into that? Some people have tried to recreate Egyptian chariots, but there's work done in looking at how Hittite chariots were likely put together, and you can't tell a lot. I mean, there are a few chariots that have survived in sort of permafrost areas of Siberia, like some of them got dug up at Pazyryk, but they don't seem to be functional fighting chariots. So all they've got, other than representations in terms of anything original, they've got some sort of, I think, roughly Ramses, the whatever-ish, if type chariots that survive in Egypt, and they've done some reproductions from those. But there are any number of like petroglyphs and other things, and there seems to be a big issue with the placement of the platform that you stand on relative to the axle. I mean, chariots, the whole thing of like rednecks. Like, I mean, there was this guy I talked to. I got rear-ended. I had a Delta 88, and I love that car, man. God, I'd love to have another one again. Big ass American cars where you don't have to hurry. You can put your hand on the steering wheel and put your other arm up on your across your bench seat. Man, you younger people, you know nothing about America, what it is to be an American, unless you're driving around in a bit like a Cadillac or a Lincoln, or like I said, a Delta 88. I had a Caddy too. Anyway, I was driving along in my beautiful giant beast, which I just loved, and somebody rear-ended me and fucked the car up. And I was much younger, so it wasn't like, you know, just total it or whatever. And so I was thinking to myself, can I possibly can I possibly save this fucking car? And there was this dude who's a printer who used to come to the place I worked. I worked for a big power company in their graphic design section. So I was a scanner operator back when, you know, scanners were fancy, and, you know, you'd mount your negatives on the drum with oil and, you know, scan at high resolution for printing. Basically, I was in pre-press as a young man. And this guy used to come who was a printer, and he would deal with the corporate people, and, you know, we talked. And I saw him one day, he had a little tattoo on his shoulder that said FTW. And the woman I was working with had seen it because it was exposed under his shirt sleeve on Casual Friday or something. She was like, "What does FTW mean?" And he's this redheaded guy. He says, "Well, feed the world." I just laughed my ass off because I knew what it meant, and we got to be friends. So I went to talk to him at his printing shop one day, and we were out front having cigarettes, and I was talking to him about how I'd been rear-ended. And he said to me, "Well, what you need to do, let me tell you, is you get yourself a chain, you make sure you got yourself a good length of it, you find yourself a big old oak tree, and what you do is you wrap your chain a number of times around your big old tree, make sure it's a big one, it's got to have deep roots and everything, and then you roll that chain out and you hook it around your axle, and then you get you some slack. Now, buckle your seatbelt." And he's telling me to peel out, you know, and get snapped and drawn up tight to bend the axle back into shape, or the frame, or whatever it was. And he said to me, "Because metal has memory." I could just see myself going straight through the fucking windshield trying his advice. Anyway, the point I'm getting at with the design of chariots is that same redneck shit of metal has a memory, and, "Hey, fellers, watch this." You know, I know that's the reason we're still into cars. That's the reason this Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez bullshit of taking away our rides will never happen. Ride goes with road and raid and raider. It's and Ratha and Rita, which mean chariot. Ratha means chariot. Rita in Gallic means chariot. They give us the word ride. One of the reasons that I thought the chariots came first, because our term for ride is the name of a chariot. So if we refer to riding in the oldest word that we have with the word of chariot, it means that we probably rode chariots before we rode on horseback. Anyway, that explains what I was talking about earlier. But that shit, they're never going to take away our ride. A road is just the two tracks formed by wheels, the two wheels of a chariot. The road is what is left by the passage of a chariot. Our ride, which is a Rita or a Ratha, a chariot, they're never going to take that shit away from us. Rednecks are always going to want to make something that goes further or faster. And in terms of racing chariots, yeah, I wanted to do it with dogs, because in these cities, everybody has their pet dogs. And I'd love to take, and I want to do this, man. If there's anybody in this chat who wants to do this, I totally want to do this. We have like roads that are designed for bicyclists and joggers that are part of a green space. I want to build a badass chariot using a lightweight aluminum frame and skateboard wheels. And then you get sled dogs and you get them to pull it in town, and you race that shit. God, that would be fun. Anyway, a bunch of, you know, PETA people and, you know, ethical treatment of animals fuckers are going to tell us that, you know, it's terrible and destructive to have dogs. God, all you'd have to do is get the actual sled dog team, sled dog training. All that knowledge is already there. You just bring a damn sled dog person down to the south, and you say, "Look, I'm going to put you up and pay you for 2 months while you, or however long it takes to train people to deal with sled dogs. You got to have the lead dog that leads the rest of them, the way the rig is set up." But then where that rig ends, where it would normally attach to a sled, you just have like a bicycle frame builder or a skateboard guy build a badass frame and connect them, and you can race on these trails with dogs. Even the yuppies would love it because they like dogs rather than children. All right. Anyway. So what are we on now? Sorry, I went off into left field, but that happens to me. It's Friday night. Chariot lanes for the green agenda. Yes, sir, Charles. The Caucasian Tarim mummies found in Tarim, northwest China, are interesting examples of Indo-European horse culture as well. We've always been riding in style. Yes. And you know what's a trip is when you pull those mummies out, and you know, it just makes me furious. They're everywhere. You motherfuckers probably don't know it, but those mummies, they're just sticking up out of the sand. If you just wander through, it's not the Taklamakan, but the Tarim Basin and that area near Urumqi and the rest, you just go to some out of the way area, And you're going to be walking along and just come over like hands and legs and clothing sticking up out of the sand from 3,000, years ago. And it's just sitting there. And the Chinese pull them out of the sand, but they take them to a place that's less arid and they just rot away. There is an enormous cultural heritage in the Tarim Basin. These mummies of Urumqi and Tarim that just got mentioned here by Bubba von Scheckelhausen. They're all sitting there, and it's being destroyed because no one is investing in protecting that heritage. And the Chinese, while capturing and preserving some of it, are generally they don't really care. Anyway, yes, you pull mummies out of there that are like 5'10" women with like reddish brown hair. Yeah, and they still have the same colors. You'll see red, white, and blue, which has to do with pure white blue wool, which will give you white, and madder root, which will give you red, and indigo, which will give you blue. And the persistence of red, white, and blue as Indo-European colors, as reflected in many of the flags. I mean, you get the Habsburg stuff with gold and red, but red, white, and blue is something that connects all the Europeans together because of the availability of those dyes in our region. That later purple shit is all about Murex and the rest. H. Grimes says there will be no compromise with commies. Fucking A right, there won't be. All right. Shoot them in the head, pet people. Come on now. All right. The dog whisperer had fun being pulled on a skateboard by his dogs. Yes, Miss Pat Ashley. That may well be. Christian Lee, what is he saying? The Chinese are hiding them left and right. Yeah, and you know what else? I found an axe head, or I came across, I did not find it, but in the literature, I found an axe head, a bronze axe head that's, you know, some like Shang period bronze. So I don't know, pulling it out of my ass. That's like 1200 BC. And it's a particular type of axe head that has these little curls where the axe head is like this and it comes around and then it has these little curls at the end, right? So it'd be around and then these little curls and comes down and has the head, right? And there's a Chinese one that was found, but it had no tang. And it was discovered later when they found more of them that the Chinese had put a false tang on it that had Chinese characters on it that appear to be Shang to make it seem to be a Shang axe head. But you know, it's crazy, and I've never seen anyone talk about this. There are sculptures of Hittites from Asia Minor that show them with an axe in the belt of exactly the same type that has been pulled up, or appearance. And it would doubtless have been bronze from that period as the ones that are coming out of Western China. It's just crazy. They're fucking, you're going to find, there's going to be discoveries, Tim often talks about it, of all kinds of ancient white people culture from Siberia all the way down to Western China. It's just, we haven't come across it yet. All right, do I know anything about the origins of the Ainu? The hairy Ainu? No, I don't really. I mean, I know that back in the day they were thought to be some peripheral Indo-European group that crossbred, and then more recently that has been argued out and called just total error. I haven't looked into it, so I don't know. Wow, mummies being ground up into Chinese folk medicine. Oh my God, can you imagine? Your ancestors try to protect your carcass, and 3,000 years later, you get ground into a paste and snorted up the nose of some fat Chinese dude. All right, what else do we have? Manta Ray of Hope. God, is that Man Ray? Is that Manta Ray? Is that Ray of Hope? So many confusing things married in one, and 23 skidoo at the end. Oh my God, there's a Bill Burroughs moment. Semiagog, what do you think of Sun Tzu and Zig Ziglar? Sun Tzu I can talk about. I do not know what Zig Ziglar is, so you will have to tell me more about that. I will say this about the Ainu. There's just too much in the material culture of the Pacific Northwest and the Ainu of Japan that looks similar. And they try to explain it away in cute ways, but it looks really fucking similar to me. So there may well be something going on there. Johnsky says, I found a mummy in my cat's litter. That's gross. I don't know what you're doing on a Friday night digging through cat litter, Mr. Cat Lady. Just to let you know, we're heading towards a magnetic pole flip within the next decade. Nice to know, Boomer 21. Thanks, man. Thanks. Good to know that magnetic pole flip's going to fuck us. If nothing else, it's going to throw off GPSs. Michael Reeves, ancient white civilizations, Greater Tartaria, Hyperborea. I don't know. I think we're going to find some of that in the far eastern regions that we have not explored properly. I think we're also going to find a bunch of paleontological evidence about the history of man. Mainly those bitches have been looking in the Great Rift Valley just because they can walk along the bottom of it without having to dig. As soon as they start looking somewhere else, they may well find something. Louis the 16th references, I'm sorry, 17th references his favorite website. I don't have time to check it, but I'll have a look. Any relation from Ian Wilmot's, any relation here to a Graham Hancock type of idea of a previous cycle of civilization, like a white Atlantean founding race? No, not that I thought of. Newfoundland is the perfect island for a new country. I don't know that about that, man. My ancestors arrived. The earliest of the ancestors I've tracked who came here showed up in roughly Newfoundland, New Brunswick in about 1660. And they were there until the 1750s when the English drove them out and they came to Louisiana. I mean, that's up where the Oak Island treasure and shit is, isn't it? I mean, from everything I can see, it's fucking cold and shitty weather. I mean, if you're from up around there, like from Canada in general, and you like that kind of miserable weather, I mean, yeah. For me, I want to be right in around Southern Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee. That band is where it's best. All right, I'm going to be here until 11:45, so we have 14 more minutes. Thank you all of you for sticking with me. I realize this must have been some crazy winding shit at the beginning, but it's something I had always wanted to do a clip on that material and never gotten around to it. So now I did my job, and people who wish to be exposed to it can be now. Manta Ray comes back to me. Zig Ziglar was a business guru for the 80s and 90s. So I guess what you're talking about was the fetish for taking ancient texts on strategy that were like the Hagakure and the Book of Five Rings and Sun Tzu and applying it to the world of business. I'm not really into that. I've heard of it. Again, I'm just guessing. Sun Tzu, however, is quite interesting and an object of repeated study for me. Creed Scalder asks, if academia finds ancient white civilizations, why would they tell anyone given the current anti-white project? Very good question. GSP says New Brunswick is a beautiful but harsh place. I think that's what he's talking about. Amanda Anderson, good evening. Sweet, sweet Amanda. As sweet as rattlesnake venom. Don't fuck with Amanda. Welcome, Miss Amanda. Boomer 21. Didn't mean to upset me. I hope you're not talking about me. Oh, no, you didn't upset me about the magnetic pole flip. Binary Epidemic says I'm Acadian. No, one branch, my father's bloodline has Acadian, and they're the first ones to come in the 1660s, as I said, and then they ended up in Louisiana in the 1750s, and then the next earliest group that is in my genetic background came from England in the 1750s. So it's both 1750s. I mean, 1660s to Micmac land, and then they went back down to Cajun land, and then right about the time they went to Cajun land, some British Isles folks, and I can't determine whether they're Scots or English or Irish or Welsh or whatever, they showed up in the area of Delaware and New Jersey in the 1750s. All right. Tennessee, yes. Nashville. Yeah, I don't know about Nashville, man. It's a pretty big city now. It's pretty, and parts of the suburbs are nice, and I like hot chicken. But I like further east, and I definitely don't like West Tennessee. I've been to Memphis a couple times, and it's like, I don't know. It's got all the problems of New Orleans, except it's not quite as hot. Just kind of dumpy and crime riddled, and I don't know, not to piss anybody off who's from Memphis, but it wasn't my scene. Do I like the humid southern weather or drier Rocky Mountain lowland weather? I don't know Rocky Mountain lowlands at all. I mean, that's not my peeps in my place. I've driven through there and it's just fucking gorgeous. I did 2 cross-country trips on a motorcycle and there's nothing better than going through. I must have been in the lowlands of the Rockies in some sense during the best parts of my first and my second cross-country motorcycle trip. So it's fucking beautiful. I mean, there are areas of the West that are just gorgeous, and the East Coast doesn't compete. You know, you see the Appalachians, and it's just kind of green, lumpy things, you know, and rhododendrons and, you know, mountains, but they're almost like hills compared to mountains in the West. But it's just, that's where I'm from. Not that I couldn't do it. I would love to live in the environment of, you know, a Colorado type scene or some of the areas of Utah because it's beautiful, but it's not where I come from. And I still, I think I could do it, but I'd have to like shack up with a woman and like, you know, bring your own social company and then do it that way because, you know, I'm not sure the people out that way talk weird compared to how I talk. So anyway, what else do we have here? Problem is Tennessee is landlocked. Could you survive there after the collapse without civilization? Yeah, in Tennessee you do just fine as long as you didn't annoy the wrong person. I mean, it'd be way better than like, you know, Southern California or Northern Illinois where you'll freeze to death and be impaled on big sheets of ice. All right. Have I heard of Le Becquet of the French Antilles? No, I have not. I think the Poles are ready to flip out of the EU. Maybe there's some stuff going on with a new, there's some new left-wing Polish guy that they're trying to push. Some mayor got assassinated or something or killed, murdered. And now there's some total SJW wet dream who's supposed to be, you know, I guess it's the Polish version of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I don't know, whatever. There's stuff going on in Poland. I have to look at it. I'm thinking about doing a clip on it, actually. JR says, so you was a true pre-revolutionary patriot. Well, I'm a mix, man. I have 1660s, somewhere in there, early, like I said, Micmac country. And then they moved down to Louisiana. And then someone from some group from the bloodline from the British Isles shows up around 1750. But then I've got much more recent stuff. That's my dad's side. On my mom's side, I have Germans who showed up in the 1830s. And one of them stayed in New Orleans. The other brothers went up to, I want to say, Missouri. And anyway, they formed the Timken Roller Bearing Company. My middle name is Timken. But I was the one of the 4 brothers who stayed in New Orleans and never got rich. So I can't go and beg the Timken family for money. But my Greek relatives came over probably in the teens of the 1900s. My mother's grandfather. And then he married a German woman, those Timkins from the 1830s. And then their daughter, my grandmother, married a first-generation Italian immigrant from Tuscany. So I've got old American blood, and then I've got sort of the Ellis Island side of more recent arrivals, very much there. So I'm both. Okay, what else do we have here? I hate hot and humid most. Yeah, it is not my scene. That's why I can't stay in New Orleans. I mean, also they took down the statue of Lee in Lee Circle, so I'm never going back to New Orleans, even though my family's there from both sides. Fuck them though. Yeah, New Orleans is New Orleans. I say it's where drunks go to die. It's just fucked up. Christian League is in the high Andes. Yeah, I bet it is. Man, that's got to be some brisk and bracing weather. And any people who settle in the Andes you got to get stronger being high in the mountains. life's a little rougher, but it makes you tougher. I mean, Caucasian tribesmen, Swiss mercenaries, or, people up making reed boats in Lake Titicaca with like chests that are like, 2 feet, 3 feet wide, chewing on coca leaves. All right. Greetings from Poland. Greetings right back at you, Poland. Strong. Acadian genealogy. Levity Levity has some Acadian too. Wow, I guess there are Acadians around. Tennessee is 2 states, says Proud White Settler, the plantation part and associated culture, and the hillbilly part and the eastern part. Well, I get along with the hillbilly part. Oliver going to Utah to set up a new commune. No, but man, remind me one day, I'll tell you all the story of when I ran into this really hot blonde professional competing skier chick. I was 19. No, I was 21, and I was coming back to Atlanta from where I was living in the Bay Area. And this Mormon skier chick totally tried to fucking rape me in an airplane bathroom. Anyway, that's for another time. So I'm afraid of Utah. Rockies are my playground. Nice people who want to be left alone, says Amanda Anderson. Then it sounds like a nice place. The Bec is a white French settler, says Louis XVII. Settlers to the Caribbean and on the island of Martinique. There are 3,000 Becs who control 29% of the island's industries while controlling 90% of the food production. Yeah, I have to look at that. The islands, that's a whole different world. The European settlers on the islands. I think it'd be very interesting. I got to come up with the right kind of people to travel with, because most people would be bored or freaked out by what I want to go look at or think about or view or visit. All right. The Polish AOC, yes. Okay. There are 4 minutes left. So let me see if there's one last good question here. Retire to Bangkok as an expat and live it up every night with beer girls in the nightlife. I've been to Bangkok, and I have some friends in the military who spent a bunch of time vacationing in Bangkok, and I've known people who go there and they love to get into the whole dissolute thing, and bang the Thai girls and, live it up. I don't want to be that far from freckles. Tennessee is 3 states. Fair enough. My video went fuzzy. All right. Adherent of Lady Columbia says the Upper Peninsula in Michigan or Sandpoint, Utah. I have a friend who's originally from Michigan, and he's just like thrown all his shit into buying some land up there, like 100 acres or something crazy. And he's like stretched totally thin to get it. And he's going to be paying it off for a little while, but he's a total, man, I've met some Upper Peninsula Michigan people, and they're fucking cool as shit. They're like, if you took away the Southern accent and you put the rednecks in much colder weather and made them German, you would get the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. They're totally great people. They'll talk to you about like, your rifles and calibers and hunting, and they're fucking cool people. I dig them. Thoughts on the picks? I don't have time to go into that now, since we have now only 2 minutes left. Gavin McGinnis is suing the SPLC. Do you think his case is the crack before the rupture of the dam? Asks Stealth Creations. We'll see, man. It's about to get crazy. We haven't seen anything yet. It's going to get much crazier in terms of the back and forth and the lawsuits and everything else. You'd be watching these Covington kids as well. Keep an eye on it. We haven't seen shit up to the 2020 election, and with the 2019 elections in Europe, it's going to get fucking insane. All right. Best Southern state to live in? I'm guessing East Tennessee, but you know what? Georgia isn't bad. If Alabama wasn't full of Alabamans, there are some parts of northern Alabama that look nice, but I don't know. Albuquerque. Great show, Ollie from GSP. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ollie. When is the next live stream? Asks Megalith. I don't know. These are occasional occurrences. Kicked off by my sudden desire to do it. And I've got a couple of clips of Tim, Mr. Tim, discussions I did with him that I mentioned at the outset of all of this that will be going up over the next few days. But I will probably be doing a live stream with Tim soon, because there's some stuff that we cover in a recent clip that he said we should basically do as a live stream in order to dig more deeply into it. But it's going to take a little while. But I'll be doing these at intervals. Mr. Ixme asks, how's Savannah? I mean, when I've been there, it's beautiful. It's got a little bit of that funky marshy smell that I also get sometimes on the Gulf, like, you know, between Biloxi and Mobile, and, you know, those kinds of, there's a rotten marsh smell you get sometimes, but it's on the Atlantic. It can be nice. It's a very old town. It's got SCAD down there, Savannah College of Art and Design. I haven't been there in a long time. It's been a long time since I've been there, but it's only like 6 hours away from me. So I'd check it out. You should check it out if you want to get out of the great East Coast, excuse me, Northwest Coast madness, Mr. Ixme. Jesse J says, great show. I thank you in return. Thank you for checking it out. Thank you, all of you, for joining me. I wound all over the place with the initial stuff, but hopefully there will be some of you who dig it, who have the background and experience to see the value in it. I don't assert that what I presented there was necessarily something that you need to internalize as your own, but in looking at how I went through making it, you can learn how to unpuzzle or even craft such things for yourself. As I said, I don't know when the next live stream will come, but within the next 24 to 48 hours, I will be able to post these clips from Tim. And who knows, maybe come Sunday night, depending on how things go, I might do another live stream, but there will definitely be more in the future. Thanks to Mr. Ixme, who had no choice in the matter, but who is saddled with a moderator's wrench, and apparently didn't even need it. That's always nice. Well, Faith Ale is in. Sorry you missed the beginning of it. Please check it out. And Zedez, I should say howdy too. Yeah, check out the clip. I'll be back soon with a live stream in the near future, and likely one with Tim. Again, 24 to 48 hours on some new clips. And that is all for me. You guys... Mr. Ixme saying it didn't throw anybody in the trash can. That's all right. There'll be plenty of opportunities. In future, I'm sure there will be plenty of people who want to come and talk shit. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is all for me. I'm out of my whiskey, and I don't even have an ice cube. I want to have a cigarette, so I'm going to have to go. Thanks to everyone for dropping in. Thank you very much. And until next time, I'm Semi-Agog. If you can't be good. What do they say? They say something like, be good at it or something. I'm going to go now. It's late and I've had a lot of whiskey. Get it? Got it? Good. Semi-Agog